Are you ready for the word?
Yes, sir.
Turn to Genesis chapter 2. Sometimes we need to pause and remind ourselves of what we do and why we do it. Today is going to be such a day. I hope by next Sabbath to return to our study in the book of Enoch. But we're not going to do that today. Today we're going to pause, remind ourselves of what we do and why we do it. We're going to remind ourselves of the absolute holiness of the Sabbath day. Genesis 2 verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day Elohim, the mighty one, ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And Elohim, the mighty one, blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which Elohim created and made. In those few verses, we're told some very specific things that are essential to anybody, essential for anybody to know and understand if they're going to call themselves a Bible believer. If they're going to call themselves Yahweh's servants, there are some things here that are essential for us to know. They're elementary. However, we need to make sure that because they are elementary that we don't overlook them. Notice, first of all, it says Yahweh rested what day? Rested the seventh day. Well, the only way to find a reference for what he meant when he said he rested the seventh day is to read the chapter before it. Genesis 1 lists 6 other days. On those 6 other days, Yahweh was not resting. He was working. Genesis 2 verse 3, I think the last phrase there in verse 3 says he was creating and making. And he did that for 6 days, and he did an awesome job. So before we move on, let's just remind ourselves of that, because regrettably we become so familiar with what he created and what he made that we fail to fully appreciate the awesomeness of it. The awesomeness not only of what he created and what he made, but the awesomeness of whom we serve and what he did. You know, we'll talk for days and sometimes endlessly about some athletes' superb abilities. Did you see that throw he made? Did you see that catch he made? Did you see that run he made? And we'll talk endlessly about their abilities, right? And yet, we are most of the time unaware or unappreciative or unmoved by all the mighty things that Yahweh did. Genesis 1:10. And Elohim, the mighty one, called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And the mighty one saw that it was what? Good. Good. What's the Hebrew word there? Does anybody know?
Tob. Perfect.
Tob. What's Tob mean?
Perfect.
Perfect. In Hebrew, you cannot get any better than Tob. In English, we say good, better, and best. So good is kind of below, but not in Hebrew. In Hebrew, when a thing is said to be Tob, it is said to be the best it can possibly be. When Yahweh says it is Tob, you can rest assured it is Tob. It is good. It is the best. The word carries with it the idea of being beautiful, being bountiful, being pleasant. So Yahweh saw the earth he created, the seas, and he said, "My, this is remarkable what I just did." He made the grass and the trees and said, "Oh, this is Tob." That was on the third day. On the fourth day, the sun, moon, and stars were set in place. And when he saw it, he said, "Whoa, this is Tob." On the fifth day, all of the creatures were made by him that are in the sea. And he said, be fruitful and multiply. And he watched that take place in the seas. And he said, this is Tob. On the sixth day, he made all the land creatures and said, this is Tob. Then also on day 6, he made man in his image and in his likeness. And when he finished everything he had made, he looked at all of it and he said, actually, it's very Tob. Extremely Tob, mightily good, completely good. So we need to sometimes stop and think about where we live. Romans 8, why don't you turn there rather than me just read it to you? We've got time. Romans chapter 1, verse 18. I said Romans 8 first time, didn't I? Yeah. That's right, I said Romans 1 twice afterward. Romans 1, verse 18. For the wrath of Yahweh is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. That is, they subdue truth. Verse 19. Because that which may be known of Yahweh is manifest in them, for Yahweh has showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So everything that was created and everything that is testifies of Yahweh's eternal power and of his divinity. Every bit of it. I don't care where you look and what you're looking at. It's testifying of Yahweh's eternal power. Verse 21 there says, because that when they knew Yahweh. So it's fixing to condemn them because when they knew Yahweh. Well, how and when did they know him? What if they never went to a synagogue? What if they never attended an assembly? What if nobody ever gave them a copy of the scriptures? The point that Romans 1 is making is it's impossible to look at what he created and deny his existence. Because when they knew Yahweh, and he's just talked about what he created, they glorified him not as the mighty one, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. So all of creation shouts that he is, and it doesn't just shout that he is, it shouts that he's awesome. Now you go back to Genesis 2. Genesis 2 says that Yahweh rested on the seventh day. That can only be understood in context of Genesis 1. Genesis 1 tells us that Yahweh was creating and making things for 6 days. Now on the seventh day he rests. So that's the first thing we're told. The next thing we're told is he blessed what? He blessed what? Say it out loud. What did he bless?
The seventh day.
The seventh day. He blessed the seventh day. To bless something is an act of adoration. More often than not, the word bless means to say something verbally, to give praise to something. Bless Yahweh, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. That is calling upon me to say something verbally, to give adoration to him with my mouth. So here it says that Yahweh blessed the seventh day. It was an act of adoration on his part. Men have no right to cast aside and treat as unimportant what Yahweh gave praise and adoration to.
Right.
He looked at all he created and says, that's very Tob. He looked at the seventh day and said, I'm blessing this day. I adore this day. I'm going to give praise to this day. He didn't bless the third day when he made the firmament. He didn't bless the fourth day when he set the sun, moon, and stars in the firmament. He didn't bless the fifth day when he created the whales. He didn't bless the sixth day when he created the beasts of the field, mankind. But he gave praise and adoration for the seventh day. And he certainly didn't bless what Christians today call the first day of the week. They do, but he didn't. The seventh day was given a blessing. The third thing we find out he did was he sanctified the seventh day. Sanctified it. That's important. This is the Hebrew word kadosh. Kadosh means to set something apart, to mark it as holy, to mark it as clean, to separate it. It is consecrated. It's holy. It has a divine, set-apart purpose. He sanctified it. He set it apart for a divine purpose. He consecrated it. He didn't just sanctify for us a rest day. He sanctified the seventh day. He's very specific. He's very specific in his instructions. He says it plainly. So men cannot choose another day. Men cannot bless the first day of the week and sanctify it. They don't have that power and they don't have that authority. Yahweh has declared the seventh day is sanctified. Just say it again. Men cannot choose another day of rest and worship. If they do, they're contradicting Yahweh. It's an attempt to usurp his authority. Those who changed it from the seventh day to the first day of the week brag about the fact that they are proving their authority, because they will tell you that there is nowhere in Scripture it says that the first day is to be a day of worship or to be set aside or to be honored. They tell you that there's nowhere in Scripture that does it, but yet most of the world worships on the first day of the week because they have declared that they should, which shows their authority. I don't follow them, I follow the Scriptures. Read verse 3 again. He makes it clear what day he's talking about and why he blessed it and why he sanctified it. Why did he bless the seventh day and why did he sanctify the seventh day?
He had rested from all his work?
Because he rested from all his work. Because means here's the reason I'm doing it. Because he rested from all his work which he had made. All his work was done on days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now let's go look at it from Exodus chapter 20. Are you there? Look at verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Well, all right, I'm going to remember it. What day would that be? Well, he tells us. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath. Say that with me. The seventh day is the Sabbath. Say it again. The seventh day is the Sabbath. It's not just the Sabbath, it's the Sabbath of Yahweh, your Elohim. In it you shall not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger that is within your gates. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. They're synonymous. Verse 11. He rested the seventh day. Therefore he blessed the Sabbath day, which is the seventh day, and hallowed it. Notice how the Sabbath day is identified. It is identified as the seventh day. Now, just as the feasts are not Jewish, what are they? They're the feast of Yahweh. Leviticus 23 makes that clear. Notice in verse 10 that it is stated plainly the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Jews. What does verse 10 say? Sabbath. I just want you to be engaged with me this morning. The seventh day is the Sabbath of Yahweh. There is no other identification given for the Sabbath day than this one. This one refers back to Genesis 2. The Sabbath day is the seventh day. It makes that clear. So, let me say it this way. The Sabbath day is the seventh day. The seventh day is the Sabbath day. All right? The Sabbath day is the seventh day. The seventh day is the Sabbath day. They go. That's the identification we're given. That's the definition we're given. Yahweh wants us to know precisely when it is. But knowing when it is and what it is just the beginning. I remember when we first started studying the Sabbath. Many years ago, we started looking into Torah. The primary overriding concerns we had were not when is the Sabbath. That seemed pretty clear early on. It seemed obvious to us. Instead, we were asking these kind of questions. What can we do on the Sabbath? What are we not supposed to do on the Sabbath? We wanted to know how to properly keep or observe the Sabbath. But if you look at this text here in Exodus 20, we are told exactly what to do in this commandment itself. If we're going to focus on, well, what should we do on the Sabbath, this commandment tells us. There's some very specific instruction listed in the commandment itself. The first thing we're told to do concerning the Sabbath is what? What's the first line in Exodus 20 when it comes to the fourth commandment? Remember it. Remember the Sabbath. That means to mark it so as to be recognized, to be mindful of it and to think about it. Mindful of it and think about it. So we get all bogged down in, can I do this? Can I do that? And we fret over a lot of stuff when the first thing Yahweh told us to do is make sure we remember it. Mark it and be mindful of it, recognize it, and think about it. Think about it this way. There are things that today's churchgoers do remember. They remember when Christmas is. 17 days till Christmas. 12 days to Christmas. 9 more shopping days to Christmas. You think Christmas ever slips up on them?
Absolutely.
Did it ever slip up on us when we were celebrating it? No. It never catches them by surprise. They are counting. Christmas is not only remembered, it's planned out for months in advance. In remembering it, they're longing for it. They're looking forward to it. They're celebrating it with great affection. Same thing when it comes to Easter. It never catches them by surprise. It never gets treated as just another day. They work for months on creating cantatas. They work for months putting together drama productions. Producing drama productions. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. They have their plays. They observe it with special services and a lot of hype. So the point is, Christmas and Easter are always remembered. Nobody has to be reminded or encouraged to remember them. It's already in their minds and hearts, and they observe it with great enthusiasm. Well, how much more should we have the Sabbath in our minds and hearts? How much more should we long for it to arrive so that we can keep it with enthusiasm? How should we observe the Sabbath? Well, way before we ever start talking about altering our behavior, we need to start talking about altering our mindset. Yahweh could have started this commandment, do not work on the Sabbath. But that's not what he did. Though ceasing from our labors is an integral part of observing it, way before he talked to us about altering our actions, he wants to alter our thoughts. The command to remember is a command to place the Sabbath into our thinking. Keep your a marker there in Exodus 20. We're going to come back to it. But let's go to Amos chapter 4. We'll look at a illustration of doing the very opposite of what Exodus 20 is telling us to do. Amos 8. Amos chapter 8 is an illustration of people doing the very opposite of what we're commanded to do in Exodus 20. Remember, it means to love it and look forward to it. Amos chapter 8 verse 4. Hear this, O you that swallow up the needy, even to make the poor of the land to fail, saying, when will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath, that we may set forth wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel great, falsifying the balances by deceit. So there are two things they want to disappear so that they can go on about their daily business. Verse 5 mentions them. In the King James it says new moon, but yet we know that it can't be new moon. Why? Say again.
The word's not there.
What word's not there? The word for moon's not there. What other word's not there?
The word for new.
The word for new is not there. Kadash is the word for new. Yariach is the word for moon. It should scream at us when we see a translation and the Hebrew words for what it is translated into are not there.
Yeah.
Instead, it's the Hebrew word kodesh. Kodesh is used 276 times in the Scripture. And it is always translated as month. Kodesh means a span of time, a month. 20 times, 256 times it's translated as month, 20 times it's translated as new moon, but wrongfully so. And let's look at this here. We're not going to get off on a new moon teaching. There are, if you go to our YouTube channel, there are 8 videos on the new moon, not to mention, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 on Rosh Kodesh, the head month. But notice here, here's where we're going to focus this morning. 2 things that the unsanctified that Amos is talking to, 2 things that they're bothered by. They're bothered by Kodesh and the Sabbath. Why are they bothered by the Kodesh? Not the new moon, but they're bothered by the Kodesh. If you study this thing out, you will find one month that is above all the other months. In Exodus 12, it is called Rosh Kodesh. What does Rosh mean? Rosh. The head. Always means the head. So the head month is identified for us in Exodus 12. We're told what to do for it in Numbers chapter 10. But the head month is always the month of Obib. In Amos 8:5, what are they desiring to sell? Grain. If they're desiring to sell grain, what month are we in? They're in the month where grain is maturing. What takes place in the head month? What are we required to do in the head month? So it's a good thing we rehearse these things. Do what, Amanda?
Kill the Passover and eat unleavened bread.
Okay. First thing we're told to do is mark Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh. We have to mark it. So that is the beginning, the head of the year, the Rishon of the year, the first month of the year. So we have a New Year celebration. The New Year starts there, right? Numbers 10 tells us what to do there. The second thing is you have the 10th day of the first month where you bring a lamb into your house. The 14th day, the lamb is slaughtered betwixt the evenings. The 15th is unleavened bread. Then you count for 7 days and you have another Sabbath. The 15th is a high Sabbath. You count for 7 days, you have another Sabbath day. The 16th is first fruits. Then you start counting from the 16th and you count 50 days, then you're going to have Shavuot, right? But in between all of that, then you have 4 weekly Shabbats. These people who hate Shabbat and hate Sabbath, and all they can think about is making money. The first month of the year is an irritation to them.
Yeah, true.
Never are they required to not sell as much as they are in that first month. So it only makes sense that they're talking about Rosh Chodesh here, that Amos is referring to Rosh Chodesh here, because they wouldn't be prohibited from, there's no scripture prohibiting them from selling on the new moon of any other month. Other than when you get to the 7th month, then there's Yom Teruah. So notice their attitude toward Chodesh, and then their attitude toward the Sabbath. The Sabbath is always identified to us as the 7th day, and their attitude toward the month and the Sabbath is, I wish it would hurry up and get over so I can go back to work, make money. Well, this is the very opposite of what the commandment in Exodus 20 is telling us to do. Amos says the attitude of the people was, oh, I'll be glad when the month is over, when the Sabbath is over, so I can get back to work. But Yahweh says to us to have the Sabbath in our hearts, to have it in our minds, to look forward to it with anticipation and appreciation, to look forward to it as the blessing it is meant to be in our life, and to delight to enter into it. Isaiah 58 verse 13 says this, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of Yahweh honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words. So notice Isaiah 58, Yahweh wants us to call the Sabbath 2 things. Do you see it? You didn't see it because they didn't tell you to turn there. Isaiah 58:13 actually tells us to call it 3 things. He says, call the Sabbath a delight, call it the holy of Yahweh, and call it honorable. So when we talk about the Sabbath, we ought to say, man, the Sabbath is a delight. The Sabbath is holy of Yahweh. Yahweh sanctified it and set it apart. And the Sabbath is honorable, right? Yahweh wants us to look forward to it. To remember the Sabbath is to develop that kind of regard for it in our hearts. Oh my, I love the Sabbath, should be our attitude. When we regard it that way in our hearts, then we will have done what we were instructed to do in the commandment in Exodus 20, remember the Sabbath. So first thing is we remember it. Exodus 20 verse 8, the next thing we're told to do is to keep it holy. When we talk about the Hebrew word for keep, most of the time we're referring to what word? I know it's calling upon you Hebrew. Shamar. And it means to do what?
To guard.
To guard, protect, kind of a military term. But that's not the word used here. Shamar is not the word used here. So Yahweh said, remember it and keep it. Now when you go to Deuteronomy chapter 5 and some other places, you'll find out we are told to shamar the Sabbath. We'll talk about that in a minute. But here Yahweh is not telling us to shamar it. That is, guard it and protect it. Here he uses the Hebrew word kadash. Remember us talking about that just a few minutes ago? Yahweh blessed the 7th day and kadashed it, sanctified it. Now, he tells us to kadash it. If you look down in verse 11 of Exodus 20, you'll see that he hallowed it. Same word, kadosh. It's translated as sanctified in Genesis 2. Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and sanctified it. It's translated in verse 8 here, Exodus 28, as keep. So the command, pardon me, the command in Exodus 28 is, remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. To kadosh something is to take action to separate it and dedicate it and make it extra special, devoted to a divine purpose. So to sanctify something involves two things. First, it involves an action that is performed to set it aside or to set it apart. And then two, a pronouncement or a declaration that it's set apart. And therefore no longer to be considered normal. So there's an action and a declaration. You do something and you say something. Genesis 2:3, Yahweh blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. So he said something and he did something. What did Yahweh do different on this day than every other day? What did Yahweh do on the seventh day different than what he did on the first 6 days? He rested. His resting sanctified it. Our resting sanctified it. That was the action that he took. On every other day he created, but on this day he rested. And then he blessed it. He says something about the seventh day. He said good things about it. He made proclamations over it. His actions and his words made the day holy, special, and different. And we're commanded to do the exact same thing. We're to remember it, put it in our hearts and mind, look forward to it with great anticipation. And look at what it says, remember to. And remembering it, it leads us to do something. Remember to. We're to sanctify it. It leads to it being set apart. So, if we remember it, we're making preparations to cease from our labor. And then we begin to declare what we're told to declare. It's a delight. It's holy to Yahweh. It's honorable. So no matter what else we may or may not do on this day, if we do not have a respect and love for this day in our hearts, then we're not properly observing it. It is in remembering it that we begin the process of being obedient to Yahweh. If we do not recall it, look forward to it with delight and joy, we have failed to do the very first thing Yahweh told us to do. Too often, we rush right past this part and start concentrating on, well, can I do this? Or am I not allowed to do that? And these are good and valid questions that we need to grapple with. But the first acts of obedience are remember, rest, and bless. When's the last time you read Ezekiel chapter 20? Let me encourage you on this Sabbath day to go home and read Ezekiel chapter 20. It's a very intriguing passage. The elders of Israel came and sat down in front of Ezekiel because they had some troubling times ahead of them, and they wanted some answers from Yahweh. They wanted to inquire of Yahweh, so they went to the prophet of Yahweh to see if they could get some answers to some questions they had. They had prayer requests. They needed to hear from Yahweh. They needed some instruction. And when they came in and sat down in front of Ezekiel, Ezekiel heard Yahweh speak. And here's what he heard Yahweh say. Tell them I will not be inquired of by them. A prophet in biblical days and those called prophet in our day and time are very, very different. A prophet in our day and time is somebody who comes to churches and stands up and says good things about everybody and receives an offering and leaves with his billfold padded. Calls people out, has them stand up and tells them just how wonderful and blessed and happy they're going to be, and speaks good things over them, and then he goes out the back door. We've been taught to think that's a prophet. That's not what a prophet is. A prophet is someone who hears Yahweh speaks and then repeats what he heard Yahweh say. Yahweh asked Ezekiel this question in Ezekiel 20, will you judge them? Because that's going to take courage. Yahweh didn't say to Ezekiel, will you love them and encourage them? Anybody could do that. Yahweh said, will you judge them? Will you confront them with truth? Will you tell them what I have to say? Ezekiel did exactly that. He listened to Yahweh and he repeated Yahweh. He told them exactly what Yahweh had to say. He began by telling them Yahweh's not going to be inquired of by you. And then he lists all of the reasons why Yahweh refuses to answer their questions. In this short passage of Ezekiel 20, and Yahweh listing the reasons that he will not be inquired of by them, 4 different times he said, it's because you polluted my Sabbaths. He told them, you refuse to hallow my Sabbaths, to make them holy. Ezekiel 20 verse 12, moreover also I gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am Yahweh, that sanctifies them. But the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They walked not in my statutes, and they despised my judgment, which if a man do, he shall even live in them. And my Sabbaths they greatly polluted. Then I said, I'll pour out my fury upon them in the wilderness to consume them. So Yahweh is bothered that they have polluted his Sabbaths. This word pollute means to bore into a thing, to wound it and dissolve it. Sometimes it gets translated as the word began simply because it means to bore into, to start into something. So what does it mean to pollute the Sabbath? It means to bore into it, to open it up, and to treat it like it's any other day. It means to wound it and cause it to be what it was never meant to be. It means to dissolve its significance, to treat it as though it is common and just another day. Obedience to the 4th commandment requires us to think of it and treat it as very holy. Nothing is to be allowed to bore into it, causing us to treat it as another day. You know, last year I took an online Hebrew class, and the rabbi, the teacher of this Hebrew class, a very precious man. But quite often in that 5 or 6 months of being online with him and several others, but quite often in those months of studying with him, he would let us know that he and his family treated the Sabbath as if it had a bubble around it. And they protected that bubble so nothing could come in and contaminate it or prevent them from spending that holy time with Yahweh. What a beautiful way to see the Sabbath. We need to return to a holy reverence for the 7th day. Look back in Exodus 20 with me for just a minute. Compare this 4th commandment to the other 9 in Exodus 20. Now I'm using the King James Version. I'm not counting the Hebrew or some other version. I'm just going off of the King James Version. But the first commandment about you'll have no other Elohims, Yahweh only used 8 words. The second commandment about graven images and likenesses, he used 84 words. The third commandment dealing with his name, there were 26 words. The Sabbath, the 4th commandment, had 88 words. The fifth commandment, 22 words about honoring your father and your mother. Sixth commandment about killing, 4 words. Seventh commandment about adultery, 5 words. Eighth commandment about murder, 4 words. Ninth commandment about bearing false witness, 9 words. 10th commandment about coveting, 32 words. I'm not saying that the more words you use, it makes the commandment more important. But the more words that were used certainly reveal that a great significance was being given to that commandment. And isn't it interesting that the 2 commandments that had the most words, 84 for graven images and likenesses, 88 for the Sabbath, isn't it interesting that those 2 commandments were the ones that were either eliminated or changed by the Roman Catholic Church? And they are the 2 that are the most ignored and refused to accept by the majority of churchgoers. Graven images, 84 words. Sabbath, 88 words. Yahweh used that many words to communicate it. He could have said, you shall not make unto you any graven image or likeness, and just leave it at that. But he didn't. He elaborated on it to make sure he was clear. He could have said, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, and that been it. But he didn't. He took the time to specifically emphasize those 2 commandments. He didn't take the same amount of time to emphasize and to clarify what he meant by thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Are they less important? Yahweh forbid. But it is as if he knew. Imagine that. It's as if he knew that wicked men would remove or alter those 2 commandments so that they could turn the hearts of people from the truth to a fable. We lost 2 or 3 good families back when we were meeting in Owens Crossroads. Because at that time we were teaching through Exodus 20 and we were going through the 10 Commandments. And when we got to graven images and likenesses, we lost some families. You know why? Because they didn't consider a crucifix to be an image or a likeness. They didn't consider it wrong to have images and likenesses of the Messiah hanging on a cross. You're not taking that away from me. I'm not taking anything away from you. I'm just telling you what the Bible said. You shall not have any graven images or likenesses. Well, this one's special to me. There you go. People determine how far they're going to go in truth, and then some of them dig their heels in and won't go any further. By eliminating the 2nd and the 4th commandments, false prophets are able to convince people that they can hallow the first day of the week and that it's okay to keep images and likenesses as long as it's of Jesus. You know, a false prophet could not convince people that it's now okay to steal, or now okay to kill, or now okay to commit adultery. I admit that those standards have been greatly loosened, and people are taught that if they do these things, it's okay, that God's not mad at you no matter what. But when it comes to turning the hearts of the masses from truth to fable, there are 2 major commandments that had to be eliminated in order for them to do it, and it's the 2nd commandment and the 4th commandment.
Yeah.
Even though some Protestants put the 2nd commandment back in, they still ignore it. And even though they haven't taken the 4th commandment out, they have altered it. 88 words were used to communicate to us the importance of this day. 4, to forbid stealing. 5, to forbid adultery. 9, to forbid bearing false witness. 88 words used to communicate to us the importance of the Sabbath day. And stealing, killing, adultery, bearing false witness are very destructive to a society. They have the power to utterly make a society an unbearable place to live. So when you consider that, how important must it be then to remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy, if that's where Yahweh put His greatest emphasis? And I want to show you that that is where Yahweh put His greatest emphasis, and I'll close with this. It's in Exodus chapter 31. In Exodus chapter 20, Moses goes up on Mount Sinai. He's up there for 40 days. Now we can talk about him coming down and smashing the tablets and going back up. So whether we want to talk about first 40, second 40, that's a discussion for another time. But for the purpose today, understand Moses was up there for 40 days. And Yahweh goes over with Moses all kind of things. He gives him, writes with his own finger the commandments on the tablets of stone. He communicates to him about priestly robes and about the tabernacle, and he talks to him about all kind of things. 40 days. Now it's time for Moses to go back down after spending this wonderful time with Yahweh. He's got to go back down. Of all the things that Yahweh had talked to Moses about, do you know there's only one thing He re-emphasized before Moses left? The very last thing He talked to Moses about before Moses went back off that mountain was the Sabbath day. Exodus chapter 31 verse 13. This is right before Moses descends the mountain. Yahweh said to him, "Speak you also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily, truly my Sabbaths you shall keep. For it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Yahweh that does sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defiles it shall surely be put to death. Whosoever does any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is a Sabbath of rest, holy to Yahweh. Whosoever does any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day He rested and was refreshed. And He gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communion with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of Yahweh. Of the 10 things that He wrote on that table that He handed over to Moses, there's only one that He went back over. One. The last thing that Yahweh said before Moses descended Mount Sinai, the last thing He said to him was, this seventh day Sabbath is extremely important. Make sure they understand it. Let's quickly break it down. He said, you shall keep. That is the word shamar. It's in verse 13. You shall keep. You look in verse 14, He said, you shall keep. You look in verse 16, He said, you shall keep. And then in verse 16, it says, you shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath. The word translated observe is shamar. It means to keep. So 4 times. Verse 13, 14, and 16. He says 4 times, you shall guard the Sabbath. So listen to verse 16. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to keep the Sabbath throughout their generations. You shall guard it, to guard it throughout all of your generations. This is a commandment that you're going to have to guard with all of your might. The last night of Hanukkah, I wanted to make sure that my grandchildren understood what it means when the scriptures tell us you shall learn, keep, and do Torah. And I explained to them that the first thing we're told to do is learn it, because we can't keep or do what we haven't learned. So we got to learn it. But the instruction given to us in the book of Deuteronomy is learn, keep, and do. So we learn it, and then before we're ever instructed to do it, we're told to keep it. And that Hebrew word is guard it. With all of your strength and your might, you have to guard it. And the reason you have to guard it is because men will be relentless in their efforts to steal it from you. When you go into Torah and you start finding instruction, you're going to find that that instruction is contrary to what mainstream denominations are teaching. And so when you find it there, you're going to have to not only pull it out and learn it, now you got to guard it, because all the people out there are going to try to take it away from you and tell you it doesn't apply to you anymore. Tell you you don't have to walk in it anymore. So you learn it, then you got to guard it. And so I grabbed a pillow and I said to Sam, do you want this pillow? And he said no. And so I took the pillow and I stuck it under my arm and I said, I want you to pretend that it's the most valuable thing in the world. And pretend like you want it and take it away from me. Well, at that point, I was attacked ferociously by Sam and Brooks. I mean, they come across that couch and they got after me. It was all I could do to hold on to that pillow. I'm glad they weren't older and bigger. I mean, we had quite a struggle there, them trying to take that pillow away from me. The point being, how much more vigilant have we got to be about the Sabbath?
Amen.
Life's going to try to steal it from you. Responsibilities are going to try to steal it from you. False doctrine and false teachers are going to try to steal it from you. And that's the reason that 4 times before Moses went off of Mount Sinai, Yahweh said to Moses, make sure they understand they got to protect and guard the 7th-day Sabbath. Make sure they understand they got to protect and guard the 7th-day Sabbath. Did you get that, Moses? Yes, sir, I got it. Well, let me say it 2 more times to you, Moses. Make sure they don't know what's coming. You make sure they understand from generation to generation they're going to have to fight with all of their might to protect my 7th-day Sabbath. Look at verse 16 again. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep this Sabbath, to keep the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. Again, the word observe there is the word shamar. Yahweh is very persistent that we guard it. And to make sure we know what day He's talking about, He clarified it in verse 15 as the 7th day. Which is tied back to Exodus 20, which is tied back to Genesis 2. And then we're told by Yahweh Himself, it's a sign between Yahweh and His people. Verse 17, it's a sign between me and the children of Israel. The word sign means a beacon, a marker, or evidence. The root word used here, translated sign, means to give one's consent to. So when we keep the 7th-day Sabbath, we're giving our consent that we're in covenant with the Elohim who created everything in 6 days and rested the 7th. That's the sign. I'm giving my consent. I'm in covenant with the Elohim that created everything in 6 days. He rested the 7th. Therefore, like Him, I work 6 days and rest on the 7th. And when I rest on the 7th, I'm declaring my Elohim created everything. And my Elohim made sure it was Tob. And my Elohim did it in 6 days. And my Elohim rested on the 7th day. Therefore, I'm resting just like He did. He's awesome and I serve Him. So don't make the mistake of thinking you can serve Him and choose another day to prove your loyalty to Him. There's only one day you can serve Him and prove your loyalty to Him, and that's on the seventh day Sabbath. Say this with me. The Sabbath is a delight.
Sabbath is a delight.
All right, now say it like you mean it. The Sabbath is a delight. It is holy unto Yahweh. Say that. It is holy unto Yahweh, and it is honorable. That's what the scriptures tell us to do. Isaiah. Declare it's a delight. It's holy to Yahweh, and it's honorable. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. His name is put upon you. He Himself blesses you.